thank you for being involved in True North. Like that was a brilliant piece of work.
No, it was a lot of fun. Well, it was a lot of fun, and I had an interesting backstory as well. But we don't need to get into that. Let's think about the future.
Okay. Well. Okay. So I was telling you. So Arctic Symphony, Stigmata. Okay. That was the cello piece, right? Solo cello, right?
Yeah, solo cello.
And then
there'll be some waters for you guys.
Thank you. And then I listened to violin and piano.
Oh yeah.
The sonata.
Yeah, sonata.
Right. And then there was one more piece.
Probably Nighthawks.
No, I didn't. I saw that, but I didn't listen to it.
All right, then probably Three Scenes of Childhood.
That one.
Right here.
Thank you.
Oh, baby.
Which is which? This is.
Yours. Hold on. I gotta squeeze my line. All right.
Should I leave you alone?
Oh, there we go. Okay, now cheers.
To music.
Oh, to music.
So that's my, and I'm giving you this stuff just so you have an idea of what I know.
I should send you my SoundCloud address. It has all of my works that you can listen to.
Well, I think I got to the SoundCloud, but the thing is that I was trying to, again, I can't see the page I'm working on, so it's over there at the stereo playing, so I can hear it in decent speakers, and I'm on my iPad on the YouTube channel trying to figure out which song is playing.
All right.
So the SoundCloud problem is that there's too many pieces.
Got it. All right, no problem.
I mean, I will.
Because the pieces that's on YouTube are rather dated. It doesn't have my recent stuff. I should send you some of my recent stuff.
Okay. Well, and that feeds into exactly. So part of those things was also on your page.
Yeah.
Pardon me. I noticed there's been a whole. I mean, profanity. You were saying a whole crapload of performances going on in the last few months, like
that I know of. I just found out there's a few more. So.
Right, which has got to be awesome. Like, I mean, that's so that's kind of I'm kind of astounded by that. So,
oh, thank you very much. I mean, like, I'm very pleased with that. I mean, I'm not complaining at all. So I just wish I could be at all of them. It's sort of like seeing your child being born for the again, but you can't be there. So yeah. But
and there were several premieres, right? Or at least a couple of them were premieres.
Yeah, well, there were. Yeah, actually, yeah. One premiere I wasn't able to go to, but it went very well. And
which was that?
It was the Horizon Images for cello and piano in Ottawa.
Okay.
I got a recording, and the duo did a spectacular job. And I think that's the only one that I wasn't able to attend. There's one that's coming up in January that I may not be able to attend. It's in Vancouver.
Right.
New Music Festival. It's a chamber work. I just sent them the score and parts. And the reason why I can't make it is because I don't know if ESO will be able to fly me out. And if they can't, that's too bad. But there's also the fact that it's like 2 days before the Red Deer Symphony performance.
Right.
And I have to all, of the two, it was hard for me to decide which one to go to. So. Well,
and you mentioned that there's this world famous performer coming in so you probably that kind of skewed you to the Red Deer.
Yeah, it does, especially considering the Red Deer, I'm sure, threw in as much of the resources that they could to bring her here,
right.
And so that's I'm very, very honored by that, and I feel that just out of respect and courtesy, I should be there,
right.
Because of all the efforts that they put into mounting my piece.
So what's the thing in Vancouver?
It's a piece that I wrote for a chamber group called Standing Wave Ensemble. It's a piece titled Sandman's Realm. And actually, this piece had several manifestations. It started out as a few sketches 2 years ago. They workshopped it and presented it.
Right.
Last year, I rewrote it and revised it and made it into a piece, and about a 10-11 minute piece.
They workshopped it?
Yeah, they workshopped it.
So they've already been involved.
Yeah, they've been involved in the creative process.
Okay.
This is where it's a little complicated. So they were very supportive. Oh, let me back up a bit. Like, as a composer at this point in my life, I'm 42.
Right.
I always find that with the projects I get, there are those that are growth opportunities, and then on the other end of the spectrum, there are career opportunities, and then a lot of times the project can be a bit of both. Now, with this project, with Standing Wave, I thought this was more of a growth opportunity because they are very much a new music group. So it allowed me the opportunity to just try things out, risk failure, and just like blow caution to win. And that was important to me as a creative artist, not having to worry about whether it's going to be a good piece or a strong piece. Just let my creative imagination just run wild.
Right.
And so hence there was a workshop involved. Then a year later, from that workshop, I revised the work and made it into a 10-minute piece. They premiered it last year, and I learned a lot from that. And when I heard they were going to perform it again for this new music festival this year, I had already informed them that I hope to rewrite it again to make and be based on those two manifestations.
Right.
And they were totally fine with it. And so I came back to it, rewrote it, and so this would be the third, hopefully final manifestation.
Right.
And so for me, the reason why I felt it would be important for me to be there is because they were so supportive of the growth factor or the process, the creative process that they privileged me to, allowed me to do. And so I just felt, I would love to be there just to work it through with you guys, because there's a lot of things in the piece that were trial and error, and I'd like to hear how it works, most especially working hand in hand with the performers to get their feedback and see how it all works out.
Right.
In fact, that's one of the critical parts of the process is discussing it or having that dialogue with the performers to get their feedback. Does it work? Does it not? If it doesn't work, what do you suggest? Or do you have any other ideas? Or that buzz you get when you're talking with someone, that creative buzz where you feel you're gelling. That's the kind of atmosphere or environment that I feed on as a creative artist.
How often are you able to do that though? As a composer, isn't part of
very few. That's exactly it. I don't get that very often, and that's why this was such an important growth opportunity. This is what they provided me, the opportunity or the environment to be able to have that opportunity. What's that guy's name? There's a man that coined the word genius. Are you familiar with the word genius?
No.
It's environmental equivalent to genius, and what that is.
S-E-N-I-U-S?
S-C-E-N.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, scene, and then genius.
Okay.
And it's basically, how I describe it is, it's the environmental conditions that allows creative artists or thinkers to flourish in, where the environment has all the ingredients or all the elements that allows the person to reach their full potential.
Right.
And so Standing Wave gave me that genius, I guess you could say, to be able to just try things out, to flourish in, and allow my imagination to grow.
Wow.
Now, in any other circumstance, like Rejuvenation, for example, that was a commission, TSO, Toronto Symphony Orchestra. I had one rehearsal, one dress rehearsal, and one piano read-through. And so it was very tight. I understood that the parameters were tight. I couldn't risk failure in the same way. I mean, I still tried things out, but it was a different kind of process. And also the fact that it was programmed on a Chinese New Year concert meant that it was a concert being communicated to a particular kind of audience that had to cater to a certain kind of event, and there were certain works that were already being programmed, so I had to sort of fit within that context.
So is part of what you're suggesting in what you just said then that it was much more finished than their Sandman's Realm?
Yeah, it was it was much more finished. So it was much more, I guess you say, I took what I already knew, but with some flexibility of creativity, and still tried to fulfill the criteria of the project while retaining my musical voice. In fact, that was a pretty stressful project. It was very rewarding in many ways, but it was also stressful in the sense that because of all those conditions. Chinese New Year, I had to write a piece for orchestra and pipa and narrator, while giving all three elements equal levels of importance in some way, shape, or form. And whatever text we chose, it had to fit with the theme. And so boom, 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 boom. I had all this criteria. I was like, okay, how am I going to fulfill this? And
So who chose the text?
Originally TSO did. They wanted the text by Leonard Cohen. And
Really?
in fact, yeah, I know. Yeah. Originally, I thought it would be interesting. It was an interesting choice, but and one of the reasons why they brought me on board to fulfill this commission is because A, I had written for people before. B, I've written for narrator before. C, I've written some works that were inspired by Leonard Cohen texts in the past.
Oh yeah.
And so with all that combined, they felt I was a good fit, and also my Asian background. So there was that.
You're Asian?
Yes. You didn't figure that out? Anyways, sorry, you got
Blind
me there.
joke.
You got me there.
Okay.
Okay, well, yeah, Wu Man was a people player, and she's like renowned as one of the world's greatest people player.
Is that the one that I hear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the narrator his name is Deshan. Now he's Canadian, but he speaks fluent Mandarin. He's got his own talk show in China that garners like 1 billion views per episode. He is the most famous white dude in China. That is how big he is.
Oh, he's not Chinese.
Oh, he's not. No, he's white.
Oh.
And that's why he's such a novelty over there.
Wait a minute. The guy reading the Mandarin script
Is
in
white.
that. Oh.
He speaks better Mandarin than most Asian, like most Mandarin Chinese. Honestly.
Hilarious.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so he fits that novelty profile, the celebrity novelty profile in China, which is what makes him famous. Yeah, dude, he is bigger than Oprah.
Wow.
Like, in
Really?
comparison.
Wow. A
Like
billion views.
Yeah,
Wow,
exactly.
No kidding.
And so I have him narrating. Now that being said, he's also very, he's a very intelligent man and very creative. And so we were talking via email about this, the text, choosing the right text, because we knew it had to be Leonard Cohen. As we were looking through it, we realized, wait a second, all of his poems either deal with sex, dying, or aging.
Yeah.
What the hell? How
Yeah.
can we present this on a Chinese New Year?
Oh, I see. Right.
And so that's when we started to go through our we're talking a lengthy process of finding texts that would work with this context of the circumstances.
Right.
And we went through so many narratives, like from a children's story, the story of Chinese New Year, or the story of the history of the dragon.
Okay, I'm gonna pause you again.
Yeah.
History of the Dragon. The question that you're building in me is, what is the foundation of the piece? Is it the music or the text?
It has to be the text. We have to find
so
the right
text is first.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Because without the text, then how am I supposed to, where do I gain my inspiration from?
Okay, all right.
And so
Dragon, right?
Yeah, and so at first we thought we had one story. It was the story of the history of Chinese New Year and why people celebrate Chinese New Year. But Deshan had a good point. It was just too much of a children's story, and it doesn't highlight the true impact of what Chinese culture has made on the world. And so he's like, you know what, you're right. It's sort of like if you had Chinese, like a group of Chinese creative artists, and decided to take on the Grinch,
right?
And make that a narrative to highlight Western culture.
Yeah.
That's not representative. So we thought, okay, well, what about the Tao Te Ching? Whoa. Now that was an important contribution in philosophy and religion and just thinking. So that's when I reached out to various experts. We found and we isolated the right poems, and to cap it all off, I reached out to this Chinese-Canadian poet, writer, Lian Chao, from China, came over to Canada, and she's a Taoist expert. So we decided to have her write a brand new piece, a poem, in the second half of the work that celebrates Chinese New Year, but the year of the rooster. And so
the first half is
all from the Tao Te Ching, from the Taoist scripts,
and the second half is
hers,
original.
Yeah, but she wrote it in the same narrative rhythm or in the context of the Tao Te Ching, because she's a Taoist as well, but modernized it.
Right.
And that was something interesting. Sorry, side note. With Asian creative culture, it's not about being innovative or experimenting to the same degree as Western creative thinking is.
Right.
Because in the Western art form, because of the World War I and World War II, there's this tendency to want to break away from the past, because everything in the past is so, is considered what brought upon such horrific events.
Right.
And so World War II was like a blank slate, and so everybody perpetuated this notion of the individual spirit, where everybody had to be innovative, creative, and not have any ties to the past.
Okay.
Oh,
So we got the half rack here,
That's me, yes. Thank you very much.
and then the brisket.
Thank you. Awesome.
More coffee, right?
But whereas Chinese art form, this is interesting. There,
Okay, before, I just got to ask about, is there, oh, this,
There it
never
is,
mind.
yeah, right there.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
this is interesting. With the Chinese art form, it's not about the individualistic spirit, but the collectivistic spirit. What do I mean? It's in the creative art form, it's about taking universal themes from the past, but in each generation, the artist reinterprets or reinvents or re-examines it in their own way to reflect their own generation while still being tied to the past. And I was like, wow, that's really profound. And so with Lian Chao, the writer, she took the Tao Te Ching and presented her own take on that kind of a narrative with the context of celebrating the rooster, the year of the rooster.
Right.
And that's why I felt that she was the right fit. She understood the nature of this this piece. Her creative process was very Asian in the sense, like I said, re-examining it, but presenting it in a way that it is reflective of our generation.
So she had already done work like this before.
Oh yeah.
So she had done this kind of interpretation before you talked to her.
Absolutely.
Which is why she seemed appropriate.
Oh yeah, she was completely appropriate for this, and also the fact that she's like a bicultural. She has a foot in both worlds, so she understands the individualistic Western world and the collectivistic Asian world to be able to give rise of a poem that will communicate to both worlds.
Okay.
So I thought, so that's how the text came to be.
Okay, well, that statement that you just made right there,
Yeah.
bearing upon the piece Rejuvenation, which, so Red Deer is New Year's, Chinese New Year, right?
I think so. I have to look up when Chinese New Year is. It's January 20th is when the performance. I'm ashamed to not even know when Chinese New Year is this year because it changes every year.
Right,
so.
right. But the premise is.
Yeah.
So okay, so having said that, and what you just said about her ability to write towards two different things,
Right.
I mean that brings me to what I was listening to when I was listening to, for example, Stigmata is the solo cello piece, right?
Right.
So how old is that?
No, 2004 actually. So 13.
Holy
13
crap!
years.
Okay, well, still, listening to it, like I was very entertained because, based on what I had to say about all the different musics, I really like the fact that you've. Well, first of all, solo cello is one of my favorite classical instruments.
I never knew that.
The emotionally and passionately and also intellectually, it's such an astounding thing. I have a set of Bach solo cellos, his solo cello sonatas. What's his name? Starker.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's one of my most prized discs. But having said that, taking the whole thing and throwing it up in the air, I mean, I don't know what the cellist is doing to the poor cello, but actually, I was recording notes to myself. It's like I actually was apologizing to the cello. It's like, I don't know what she's doing, but sorry, cello, like you're just getting just battered. It sounds like, but it's also gripping, right? Gripping, and so, and this is I'm trying to find the space between. Sort of classicist, classical music, romantic classical, like the standard, very resolved and very, versus this other stuff that I also enjoy, which I'm still learning about, like that cello piece, like the stuff that's going on in True North, like the stuff that's going on. Rejuvenation is a specific, I would say, especially after what you've said, it's a specific cultural piece.
Right.
But, for example, the violin piano piece, which I think is newer, is it? 2011?
No. 2009, 2010. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a little bit newer, but also the fact that you're involved with the Lanzin Ensemble.
Right.
I'm assuming there's a lot of new work going on.
Yeah.
You're not writing Baroque cello sonatas. Well, obviously you're not. Frankly, the Rejuvenation was about as close to. Oh no, the Arctic Symphony actually. So when was the Arctic Symphony?
2010.
2010. So about the same time frame. So again, I think that seemed more classical.
Yeah, I would
in its forms.
Yeah, actually, and that's where I took the Asian approach again, where I took what was already there, like what do you call it, musical languages that I am familiar with, but I tried to recreate. Sorry, how do I put this? Express my own take on it. So, for example, in the Arctic Symphony, that last movement, there are 3 parts to it. The first part is, for me, is the music of the Western world, where it's clean string harmonies and harmonic language. The second part is music of the North, so it was inspired by the folk and throat singing tradition of the Inuit. And so with those 2 languages, I tried to find my own language within that. I tried to create my own take on it. In fact, I'm glad you brought up the Bach suites, because that's exactly how he approached it. With every suite, it's a set of dances that it was very popular at its time. And he took those dances and just made it his own. Now, the whole concept of the innovation or the individual spirit happened after the post-Napoleonic period,
right,
where it became, now it's about the individual, where everybody can now be out with the old aristocracy. Now it's the rise of the common man and woman, where everybody can become the architect of their own future. Where that gave rise to the artists putting themselves on the pedestal, saying that now we are the gods. We don't have to write for the gods. Now we're the gods, and we're going to dictate what we're going to say.
Oh,
and so began with the Beethoven spirit, actually, and the Napoleonic spirit was what really perpetuated the individualistic culture. So part of the individualistic culture is also the mode of communication, actually. This is interesting. Mode of communication, or as it's described to me, is low context communication. Now, what is low context communication? It means...
I know.
You do know.
I'm a communications major.
So you know the difference between...
Low context, high context.
Yes.
Okay,
so,
wait, no, you have to tell me now what you're going to say, because this is music you're talking about.
I know, and I'll make the connections.
Go ahead, all right.
All right, so low context communication, generally speaking, is reflective of Western culture because of the Western individualism. So low context means that a person is that much more specific. Okay, sorry. Individualism, meaning a person's it prizes a person's having their own thoughts, their own beliefs, their own ideas, and so they stand out as an individual from the masses. That each person is an individual and has their own personality and notions of how they see the world. Now, because of that, that's where low context communication comes in. They have to be that much more eloquent and clear and precise what it is they have to say. So that way everybody, regardless of the background, would understand their position or their thoughts. For example, right now I'm being very low context. I'm trying to be as clear as possible, so that way with this description, so there is no mistake as to where I'm coming from. Another great example is like university theses or legal documents. Nothing gets more low context than legal documents. Okay, they have to cover everything, so there's no mistake. Now, with the Eastern world, though, it's high context, meaning it's a collectivistic world. So it's not about the individual, it's about the community or the group that you're with. It's about putting those needs, the needs of the community, above your own self. And this is also reflected in the order of a person's name. For example, in China, it's the last name that comes first, the family name, that comes first. Why? It's because it's more important to know which house or which family or which lineage you come from, not who you are.
This is
fantastic. Oh yeah.
Thank you.
In the Western world, it's a family name comes last, where the given name comes first. Why? It's because each person is their own individual. You don't want to mistake them for any other person or member member of the family, or it doesn't even matter what family they're from most times.
Thank you for that. I have to thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
I've never heard low context and high context described in that fashion.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Helps, that helps a great deal, actually.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, a great example is like Queen Elizabeth. Okay, how many people actually know her last name? Nobody does. It's Windsor, because that's not the point.
House of Windsor, right?
Exactly. It's because she's seen as Elizabeth. She's an individual. It doesn't matter what family or what lineage. She's her, and that goes with the entire royal family. Diana, Harry, Charles, all of them.
Yeah,
you don't call them Windsor of Charles, or Windsor. No. So they're individualism, collectivism. Now, going back to collectivistic culture. So because it's collectivistic, because it's about the group mentality, they speak in a way where you don't have to be so descriptive, because everybody comes from a common background, a common understanding, and you can just say enough to be able to point the person or whoever you're talking to in the right direction. They'll fill in the blanks. But here's a great example. When my wife says to me, like in one afternoon as I'm working, it's a beautiful day, and she says, "Hey Vince, it's a beautiful day outside." Okay, now anybody outside hearing in, they probably assume that she's just making a general comment about the weather. But because of my history with her, because we have a common understanding, I look at my watch and I think, oh, it's 4 o'clock. This is when we usually take a break, have tea, or maybe run some errands together. And so, in a sense, she's telling me, oh, it's a beautiful day, let's go for a walk. It's that time of day. And so she's pointing me in a certain direction for me to fill in the blank.
Right.
There's high context communication.
Yeah.
Another example is team sports. I mean, gosh, it's not even verbal, it's gestural. Every member is like giving each other cues left, right, and center, and they have to, and everybody within the team has to know how to interpret it and respond immediately. So that's another example of high context.
Music. Back to music.
Now, back to music.
Arctic Symphony you were talking about.
Okay, now, hold on. Now, with music, before I get to Arctic Symphony.
Okay.
With music, if you look at the history since the post-Napoleonic era, and since, after Beethoven, music and the arts became that much more low context. You look at the artworks, it became that much more decorative and that much more specific, that much more detailed. Look at the music, the symphonies got bigger and bigger and that much more grandiose. Now, if you look in the Eastern world, the art world, a lot of it, I mean, there's a lot of decorative art, but if you look at it in general, especially during the same time periods, it's a lot more understated, where space plays a huge role. Look at ink brush paintings, or poetry, haiku for that matter.
Right, yeah.
It just gives enough to open the door for the viewer or listener,
right,
to put them in the state of mind, and then they fill in the blanks. They bring into the whole experience their own experience. Now, getting back to the Arctic Symphony, this is one of the things, actually in my music in general, that I wanted to try and encapsulate, is that in the first part, when I said it was music of the Western world, I was being a bit both collectivistic and individualistic, in the sense that I wasn't trying to recreate the wheel, but I took what the harmonic language of the Western world that was already there, but I made it my own. So that's where I put my voice in. And with the same thing with the second part, where it's the music that was inspired by the Inuit. The third part is when I juxtapose the two together to create this musical representation of the two worlds coming together in musical form.
This is all in the last movement.
In the last movement.
Okay.
And now, Rejuvenation, another great example where I tried to recapture the high context communication music form. Did you know? Okay. Sorry, no, of course you wouldn't know. So in music, in the Asian tradition, because it's the player historically has to accumulate their own gestures, their own natural way of expressing themselves through their own instrument. In fact, I believe that there was a certain point in time where it would be insulting if a composer would put too much information on the page for the performer, because it implies that the composer doesn't trust the performer.
Really?
Yeah. And so what they do is that
low context.
No, high context.
High context.
Yeah,
sorry,
high
sorry,
context.
Sorry, high context.
So they give them just enough information, like say a folk tune, but then performer has to give rise to their own interpretation and throw in their own riffs, their own gestures, their own decorative, gestural riffs or language, gestural language, to make it their own interpretation at that point.
Okay.
And so in Rejuvenation, what I did for Wuman, knowing this, is I gave her enough material at the beginning of each of her entrances, but then I left it blanker and blanker until it's nothing but her just improvising. And then when she comes to an end, then that's when the notes come back again, and that's how. And I notate how I want her to end it. And so there's a huge portion in that piece where it's just her improvising.
Huh.
Yeah, improvising. And so that's where it's all high context.
And she's the Peipa player.
People player, So every time she plays it, well, anytime anybody plays it, it's going to be a different experience.
Right.
It's all within the context of the environment and all the circumstances around that particular performance at that moment.
So, given what you just said about that specific piece, then that also suggests that you have to have a great deal of trust with the people who are playing.
Absolutely.
You don't have any control of who plays that, right? I mean,
not normally.
You composed it.
I mean, sometimes the only control I have is like who I decide I want to work with. That's about it.
Right.
But when it comes to if the performer is that good, and where improvisation is already their bread and butter, then I use that to my advantage. Where it's like, okay, well, this is your opportunity to make your own statement. I don't want you to just regurgitate exactly what I want or what I've notated. I want to hear you. I want you because it's that liberated spirit that makes you who you are as a performer. And so I'll give you the context of the notes. I'll write the background that'll help support you. But then once there's no notes on the page, I'm leaving it to you to fill it in. So it's all you now.
So, but the reason also that you did that is because of her, right? You said her?
Yeah.
Because of her.
Right.
And so then, would someone else, presumably someone else wouldn't take that on because you're leaving these great gaps which they may not be comfortable.
Not in the world of people players though. In the world of people players, you're expected to know how to improvise because that's the performance tradition.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and like I said, in the Asian performance tradition, it's expected for most performers to be able to improvise, to create their own, to have a whole huge repertoire of their own gestural musical riffs or repertoire of ideas that they can pull out during given the context. It's sort of like a jazz player or jazz pianist. Most jazz pianists, the great ones, would have a huge repertoire of techniques that they can just pull out on a whim when it feels right.
Right.
It's the same thing.
So is there a lot of Peipa with symphonies composed?
Actually, there are especially in China. Peipa is it's like the violin of China, and there's a ton of Peipa concertos. It's just not performed as much in the Western world because the Western North America is still tied to the Western tradition. So there's a lot of reasons to that, but we'll get to that later. And so in the Peipa world, let's put it this way: it just goes counter to the nature of traditional Chinese performance practice. So over-notate every single thing. You need to give them some breathing room so they can actually, express themselves. So you can forget like the modernist, the highly cerebralized, notated music of like turn of the century. You can forget that because that's just it just strips away the whole what do you call it? The principles.
The high context.
Yeah, the high context. Well, no, not just that, but the principle of what gives rise to music in the Asian tradition. So, yeah, very interesting things.
Okay, so, however, so let's tie stuff in to performance idea, right? Because I mean, the magazine is about live performance.
Right.
I talk about lots of other things, but always the purpose is towards live performance. Right?
All right.
And so I was, as I mentioned before, I was really interested in the fact that so much stuff was happening in the last 6 months, based on your webpage, and you said that's only the stuff that you've noticed.
Yeah. Live performance. Okay, before maybe this will help. Getting back to the topic. As a composer, one of the things I learned, during my studies, is just learning how to notate music, learning my craft, all the techniques of the trade. It took me several years until I realized that I needed to learn how to trust the performer, because when you're in the studies, you never get the luxury of working with someone like Woolman or Evelyn Glennie, and you don't realize that they see things in a certain way. And so when I started working with Evelyn Glennie back in 2011.
Sorry, who's that?
Evelyn Glennie is the percussionist. She's one of the world's greatest percussionists.
One of your pieces was for percussion and...
Orchestra, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Oh, it's called the Shaman.
Okay.
Yeah, and the whole world of percussion, I mean, how do I put this? When I presented her ideas of the original version of the work, I had everything notated a certain way that I had in my mind. But I failed to comprehend an important factor, is that everything I wrote was based on my own experience with the percussion and orchestra world. It was based on how up to that point, how I perceived.
Of course.
Yes. And then working with her, she opened my world up to the vast possibilities that can be done with the percussion world, and also what could be done when you don't think notation-based thinking, when you remove yourself from text-based thinking and just let yourself experience the music physically. And that's when I realized, okay, wait, she's not just a performer of the Western world. She understands music traditions of all other worlds, the Eastern world, the African world, the Middle Eastern world, the Pacific world. She understands the traditions, and these are traditions that you can't learn from notation-based thinking. It's just a matter of experience, or just from being with other musicians and learning from them. And so that's where I began to realize, okay, when you have a performer that good, that's when you have to when I have to remind myself, okay, how much should I notate? How much is important to notate to give them to understand what it is I want to capture, and how much should I remove to give them the freedom to interpretate? And that's one of the things I learned importantly from Evelyn Glennie. A lot of composers would be very particular about having everything notated, everything precisely notated and done exactly as written. But when you have a performer like her, and she tells you, or it doesn't have to be her, any great performer, say take Yo-Yo Ma, give him a piece, and if he calls you up as a composer, says, hey Vince, there's this passage, I don't think this is going to work, and I'll tell you why.
Does that happen much?
No, well, actually it does, actually.
Really?
Not with Yo-Yo Ma. But
no, I meant... Yeah.
Oh yeah. In fact, I encourage it to create that dialogue, that collaborative dialogue. And if he were to say to me, okay, yeah, then I've got to, this isn't working, and I'll tell you why, I've got a better idea, can we try this? What am I going to say? No? Do as you're told? I wrote the music, just play, monkey. No.
I would like you to do that.
No, I would never do that. I mean, I'm working with the best.
And record it.
Oh, hell no. and within the seconds, my career would be over. I'd be blacklisted by the world.
Yeah, well.
No. But no. That's where I have to say to myself, okay, this is a guy, or person or girl, who's got so much more experience about their instrument, about music performance. I'm going to hear them out, and maybe I'm going to learn a thing or two, so I'll give rise to creating a better piece, and that I can learn as a composer myself. And so when it comes to live performance, for me as a composer, the process of having that dialogue with the performer as they're learning the piece, to get their insight, to get some suggestions, to get some feedback, is so critical, because we both ultimately want the same thing, a great performance.
But it's a luxury as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, how many people would kill to have just 15 minutes of a lesson with Yo-Yo Ma or Evelyn Glennie? I mean, how many people would pay like $1,000 for that?
But even any of that, I mean, as you're describing that, I'm also thinking you're talking about, though, pardon me, challenging the very role of being a composer, right? I mean, as a writer, I'm pretty damn particular, right? I mean, if you want to mess with a comma, you got to tell me why. Like, my daughter's my editor, and she's always calling me down on things, and we talk about it, and I go, yeah, you're right, or not.
So here's a great example. Okay, here's an analogy that you might understand. Hold on. Say you're a playwright, okay, and you're tasked to write a play, and say you're given some of the best method actors you can think of. You got,
How are you doing over here?
well, it's terrific.
Please, yes.
What were you drinking?
Was the pony one,
Symphony?
but I would rather have something different. I think you said you had steam whiskey?
Yeah, we see what's up.
That's really hoppy, right?
Nope, it's a Pilsner.
Meaning it's not hoppy. Then that one, please. Thank you. And
Say-
are you...
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Say you're given as your lead actors and actresses Daniel Day-Lewis, Robert De Niro, Meryl Streep.
Okay.
All right. And you're like, oh my God. As a writer, you're like, okay, now I've got to up my game. I got to
Yes.
give them something they can sink their teeth into.
Yes,
All
yes.
right. I got to give them like a role of a lifetime because they're going to be playing off each other. And so I write something. We go and they read it. And one by one, they start contacting me, and they're like, as they're rehearsing together, okay, you know, this scene's not really working. Okay, can we try something? What am I going to say to that? Well, hey, whatever. Okay, you know what? How about this? I would take the Scorsese route. I'd be like, okay, well, I'll tell you what. This scene, let's just start with this few sentences, but then go off script. Just let your emotions go because you guys are fantastic actors. You're method actors. You're used to improvising. You know how to go with the emotions of the scene. So start with that and let yourself go. But as long as you come back to the end of how it's supposed to conclude in the scene, let's see what happens. That's the same thing as my process with a performer. If they say to me, okay, look, this part, it's not working for me. Can we try something different?
I don't like it.
What?
I don't like it.
You don't
I'm
like it?
sorry. I'm not what you're doing, but you're talking. I mean, what you said. And I'm thinking, okay, I've written this stuff. You know, I mean, sure, it may be Robert De Niro, who okay, Robert, whatever you like, but I'm going to be really. Like, it's going to have to be pretty extraordinary what he does.
And it's exactly it. I leave the door open for them to blow my mind. I may go in thinking, well, first of all, I worked hard on this scene, okay? And this is exactly how I wanted my mind. However, I'm going to put my ego aside, and I'm going to let you surprise me. I'm going to let you see what you can do, and if I'm convinced that this is the right way to go, okay, we'll go that way. It's happened to me so many times.
Yeah.
Here's another great example. I wrote a piece for narrator and piano and violin. Now, the narrator was Evelyn Hart.
What was it called?
Maples in the Stream.
Okay.
The narrator is Evelyn Hart. She was the prima ballerina with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet at one point, now retired, but now she's reciting. I had this, and she's a phenomenal narrator because she just, as the music flows, she just knows how to go into her
Really?
dance. Oh yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, the narration is just an extension of her ballet, and she just knows how to carry the scene. Anyways, there's this one poem where I had specifically set to music. It's a overall 30-minute work with several poems.
Okay.
But near the end,
Where are the poems from?
actually from a book by Lian Chow. Actually, that's how I worked with her.
Okay.
And it had to do with her coming from China to Canada. And in this poem, it has to do with her reflections of being in this moment of awareness, or a moment of clarity, of being in this new world and starting a new life. It's like a blank slate. And so I carefully carved out this music that was very sparse to go with this poem. Now, up to that point, because of 30-minute work, and this would have been 22 minutes into the work. There was,
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There was all music and narration together. Evelyn, during rehearsal, said, okay, Vince, this is a very emotional moment. And up to this point, we've had music and narration. Can we try separating it, where it's just me narrating, just a moment where I'm just narrating the words, no music.
Yeah.
But then after I'm done, the music comes in, and I'll just do a pantomime. And I went into it with the worst attitude possible. I was thinking, oh man, this is not going to work. I wrote it specifically the way I wanted, but I didn't say that
Right.
because it's Evelyn Hart, one of the world's greatest ballerinas. I was like, all right, well, show me what you had in mind, and we'll talk about it. And in my mind, I had already decided that's not going to work. She blew my mind. She convinced me that, whoa, what she did, just like, you know what? When I saw just the bareness of just having the words, the fragility of just how she narrated without the music, it made every single word that much more important. That it made me put me on the edge of my seat, just wanting to, just hanging with every single word, with no music to distract me. And then when the music responded, it was like a sudden relief. And that's when she blew my mind. I was like, okay, you know what? You're right. This works better. I'm going to change the music to make this work.
So performance
Oh, yeah.
is enhancing creation.
Oh yeah, because ultimately, once it's on stage, you have to be in that mode. You can't imagine it. You can't have these preconceived notions of what you think is going to happen. You actually have to experience to make your decision, those careful decisions. And so that's why. 20 years ago, I would have been like you. I'd be like, no, do exactly what's told. So now that I'm working with great performers, I'm opening myself up to seeing what they have to bring to the process that I would learn from.
Okay, well, I would suggest also that that opportunity is a result of the fact that you've had some success. You've got some. I mean, you're working with this caliber performer, obviously.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't think of an example. I mean, I don't know the Red Deer Symphony from anybody, but if the cellist from the Red Deer Symphony phoned you up and said, this piece, I'm not sure about this cello part, you probably, I'm assuming, would have a lot more reservations. But if
No, I would still hear them out. I would ask, okay, why? And what do you have in mind? Because, I'll tell you why. Ultimately, they have to own the work. They have to convincingly, I guess, quote unquote, narrate the work and make it their own. If there's a passage there that doesn't feel right to them, and it has to be their interpretation, I would be open to them suggesting something that fits, and I would hear them out. It's sort of like any monologue for an actor, except Shakespeare. Shakespeare's pretty certain. Okay. Well, actually, even Shakespearean actors will take liberties, knowing that it's more about what's how it's being said, what's behind the words, and what the actual words are. Right? So, if the performer is that committed and knows what they want and feels that just a minor adjustment needs to be made, I'm fine with it. It's the same thing with actually any role with an actor. Take Hamlet. Okay. Now you take Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro. Actually not Robert De Niro. Let's take somebody else. Ian McKellen.
Sure.
Sir Laurence Olivier and Kenneth Branagh. Boom, boom, boom. 3 different actors. They're going to give 3 totally different interpretations of Hamlet because they made it their own. And I'm guaranteed they're going to take some liberties in order to get to that point.
They make it live.
Yes. Same thing with the piece. If the performer is that good, if they're at that caliber where I can trust them to do that, then I'd be open to it. If it was a student, though, then I'd be like, no, I'd rather you just stick with what's written, all right? Because that's where I'm a little bit hesitant.
Okay, well, having said that, what you just said, is there an example of someone trying to change something that you were like, no, this is not going to happen, or?
Not necessarily. No, the only times I say that is after I heard them try it out.
Right.
After they played it for me. That's when I say, okay, this isn't working, I'll tell you why, this is what I think you should do. Actually, this happened to me when I was in Ottawa. I was at the University of Ottawa to a residency and give a presentation, and one of the student performers was performing Stigmata. I had a master class with him, and he was very cautious.
A student is performing Stigmata.
Yeah, student. Yeah,
that sounds like pretty ambitious.
Oh yeah, it was one of the upper. Actually, it was Brian Yoon's student, one of the performer that you heard.
Okay, one of his students.
And so when I heard it, I was like, okay, you're performing it too much like a student in the sense that you're trying to perform exactly as written. That's not the point. Okay, once you have the notes under your fingers, take liberties. All right, let yourself breathe. Okay, I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear your emotional history. I mean, and in some ways, I didn't tell him this, but I almost prefer if you just fuck the notes and just let yourself go with every gesture.
Right.
Much like how Al Pacino in those angry moments in his movies, he just lets himself go and just whatever comes out of his mouth is in the moment of that passion. I'd rather have that than actually have Al just being careful with every single word that he's supposed to say.
Right.
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah.
Passion.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I heard the student performer and he's trying to do something in his own, I just thought, okay, no, this isn't working. I'll tell you why, but this is what I think you should do. Only because it's not convincing me that it's really him. It's one of those human, I guess, instincts, those human elements that you just know if the person's genuine. You just know. And when a person apologizes to you or says they love you, you just know if they're genuine or not.
Right.
So it's the same thing with the performance. I just have to gauge my instincts. It's like, okay, is this working, what you're doing? Is it really telling me who you really are? Not really. So let's see if I can help you there.
So, I'm assuming you play something.
Yeah, piano.
Piano?
Mm-hmm. and well, I picked up a few other instruments. I learned, I played trombone for 9 years in high school, junior high school, and university.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Played guitar for 7 years, and violin and cello for a year each, just for fun. So,
But
piano was fun.
generally piano. I'm assuming that's probably a standard for a composer because.
Close, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That was great, as usual. The thing that you're describing, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, being a music freak, you're describing what I look for, right? I mean, I don't look for a note by note repetition of what's, you know. The reason why the magazine is about live performance is because recordings are recordings, but recordings are not what music is about.
Thank you. And this, okay, sorry to interrupt. I gotta tell you this, okay? This is where I'm passionate about live music, because
Okay.
a great musician knows to just have the notes prepared under their fingers, but not to perform it exactly each and every single time. They walk on stage, they take into account the energy in the room, the energy that the audience is giving to them, and how they're feeling, and then they respond and just go with the flow and make it happen at that moment. The worst thing you can possibly have is have a performer play it the same way each and every single time.
Exactly.
And so, this is where it comes to how I feel about live performance. For me, the performer is the ancestor of shamans. Shamans come in, they walk into the room, take into the energy of the crowd, and it's up there to them to create an atmosphere that transport us to another dimension that will nurture our soul. And during those 30 minutes to 2 hours, we forget the utilitarian world that lies outside the door, and we're transfixed, or we're taken to a whole new world that transcends material existence because of the shaman on stage. And then when it's done, when the lights go back on, we go back to our utilitarian world, but we knew that for those 2 hours, or however long it was, we were at someplace special that could only be created at that moment, with that group, with that performer, at that place and time. That is what a great musician is. And so when I hear a great musician, I say to myself, okay, is this person a craftsman, or are they a real shaman? You know, that's what I look for in a performer.
Okay, I want to toast musicians as shamans.
Oh, absolutely.
That's brilliant. I'm using that. I'm sorry. I
Please.
don't know, I have to be copyrighted or something, but that's a brilliant synopsis of exactly what's going on. It's a person accessing much more than what a person is.
Exactly.
By dint of the fact that they're performing a musical event, but you know, in the context of, we want to talk about high context, right? I mean, there's a universe, there's thousands of years of stuff feeding into what they're doing.
Right.
They don't even know what's feeding into what they're doing.
Exactly. That's the thing. And that's where the whole concept of the live performance is kind of warped in some way in the Western world. Why? Because of the post-Napoleonic period, that gave rise to entrepreneurs and middle class, and so what did that mean? That means that gave rise to live performances, public performances to a paying public, and so that gave rise to performers going on stage and making a living, entertaining people. Whereas before, it was usually for the aristocracy and the rich kings and queens, and of course there's street performers too. But that's another story. But this gave rise to this notion that there's a separation with the performer and the audience. Historically, in other cultures, that is not the case. It's about them connecting with the performer, or a lot of times even participating collectively with the performer. If you look at the African drumming community, everybody just starts dancing, starts chanting along, and it's a collective experience. Same thing with the indigenous cultures of the South Americas. South America's First Nations, Pacific Islanders, even a lot of East Asian music.
Right.
It was just the construct of the Western world post-Napoleonic era that gave rise to this separation of the paying public coming in and just seeing this performer play for them, not seeing them as a true shaman, where they're supposed to transport you to another dimension, where they're supposed to actively be involved.
So then, what you're suggesting is the shaman is a bridge between the group as a performer versus the group as an audience.
Yeah, actually. Well, it can be a bit of both, actually. And I'll tell you why. There's some music that's where it brings together the group. And some performers just know how to, like, for example, if you go to a bar and there's a live band, then everybody starts dancing, everybody starts collectively being a part of it.
Yeah.
Go to a classical music concert, there's a separation.
Yes.
You have the audience sitting politely, and so that's for a great performer, that's where they have to somehow tap into their collective consciousness and bring them together through those means, through a spiritual, emotional means rather than physical. That's where it's almost as if you're being mesmerized or being hypnotized.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of great performers, shamans, do their stuff. They get on stage, okay, I'm going to try and... Oh yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And that's why some great performers like Joey Mahler, Evan Glennie can play the most simplest tunes and still bring it all together in some way, shape, or form. I mean, if they're in a more collectivistic context, then they'd be just hammering it out and just like making sure everybody's having a good time getting people to dance.
Yeah.
And so there's various contexts that can do that.
Well, and mentioning the simplicity aspect, recently when Paul, the guy who's not here, and I were at the National Music Center recently, and upstairs in one of the areas, Hallelujah started to play.
Oh yeah.
And he was commenting on the fact that the brilliance of the song and the reason of its power is its simplicity, and that's what's so brilliant about it.
Absolutely.
And he mentioned a couple other pieces. I don't remember what they were, but I had to agree. I hadn't thought about it as such, but definitely. I mean, giant spaces, lots of. I mean, if I can use your terminology, I mean, it's kind of almost like a high contact song.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Practically.
Oh, it is, because it's so simple, and everybody has their own history with it.
Exactly.
And that's why it's so universal. I mean, some of the best songs, or sorry, not the best songs, sorry, the classics are the ones that somehow tap into the general zeitgeist of the social setting, and just how do I put this? Impacts people's lives, changes people's lives, no matter where you're from.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to have their own history with it. That's because of its simplicity, and because it connects. That song connects them with other people with their own stories with that song. Hallelujah is one of those universal songs where it's simple enough where everybody can hum it. Once you hear it, it's burned into your head, and you'll have your own history of it in some way, shape, or form. That's why the French chanson tradition was so powerful. Like the song, the French songwriter or the troubadours, where they would go along and singing their own song, was so popular is that they were simple songs that that was easy enough for people to remember, but memorable enough that it will connect people to one another, understanding the true beauty of that song because they have their own stories with it. So it's really fascinating. Okay, now that's yeah. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
That being said, okay, now
Yes.
coming back to shamanism, I'm gonna have to ponder on that whole collectivistic setting and the whole audience and
The transition between them?
Yeah, I just have to think about that because shamans, they generally just have, how do I put this? When you're in a classical music context or like stage and audience, most times when you got a great performer, it's closer to a ritual. When you got that shaman just on stage, just
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Now in the collectivistic setting, I'm not quite 100% sure if I would apply the same degree of shamanism to the same work because it's more of a collective partaking.
Well, that was what I was suggesting.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that the shaman is in between the two.
Yeah, it's probably in between the two. Yeah, I'd say more or less in between the two. Because like I'm thinking, when you gather around, like say for family holidays, and everybody's doing their caroling, you don't need a shaman for that. You just need a group of people that just want to do something together in a collective spirit.
And we all have enough knowledge about what's happening that we can participate. We know what's going on.
Right. And so that's more of an experiential thing where you're just participating in that group magic.